Good day, everyone. I'm Miko Alino from GAIA Asia Pacific. Today, I'll be discussing about the governance system and key policies in the Philippines. This live session is part of the Zero Waste Academy, focusing on policy advocacy. And this session is organized by IEPBB. And thanks for having me in this discussion. So here's my outline for this session. First, I'll cover the basics of the Local Government Code, also known as Republic Act 7160. This is a national law in the Philippines that in a way governs or provides a description on the roles and responsibilities of local governments in the country. Second, I'll cover the salient points of the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. This is the national law that mandates local governments on source separation, composting, and other ways to reduce waste from source and in disposal sites. Next, I'll be doing a recap of the implementation of the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. So, in the Philippines, it has been in place for about 20 years. There are also, in a way, some things to celebrate, and also there are also challenges in terms of implementation. Before we move to the Philippine Local Government Code, I'd like to show you this framework from this policy brief produced by the Center for Integrative and Development Studies of the University of the Philippines. So this policy brief, in a way, describes how waste management is governed in the Philippines. And in this figure, we can see how national and local stakeholders are involved through participation, collaboration, and empowerment channels. Under national stakeholders, we have the national government, we have the civil society organizations, you have your private sector or business actors. At the local level, we have your local governments. So these are your cities, provinces, and municipalities as well, the private citizens, the CSOs or the civil society organizations, and businesses as well. So, this somehow not necessarily unique to the Philippines, but this type of governments sometimes provide that space for more public participation through consultations or being represented in waste management boards. So the Local Government Code is considered as the primary guide for local governance in the Philippines. In this law, it outlines how governance should be decentralized and allow autonomy for local government units. And in this particular section that I'm citing, section 17, it covers or at least says that local governments should be self-reliant and are in a way expected to discharge duties and functions that are vested upon them. So that those functions include mostly public services. In this case, that may be related to general hygiene and sanitation, waste management, and beautification. On your right, there's a figure or a chart just showing how different agencies are interacting with each other based on their respective roles. So, waste management in the Philippines, we have two national agencies. You have the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, which in a way oversees the implementation of national policies on environmental protection and issues. And they have this agency under them. It's called the National Solid Waste Management Commission. So it is mandated in a way to oversee waste management programs that is being implemented by different local governments from provinces, municipalities, cities, and barangays. In this, the commission, in a way, is being coordinated through the Environmental Management Bureau. Also, this office acts as the secretariat for this commission. And under this national agencies, we have your local government units, the provinces. In a way, it localizes the implementation that's coming from the national agency, which is the Department of Environment. But since the waste management programs are in a way devolved or decentralized at a more local level, so these are functions are more seen or observed in municipalities, cities, and barangays. So you'll see at the bottom three boxes, these local government units are in a way responsible to um, make sure that waste management programs are happening in their respective jurisdictions, including disposal, collection, sorting, and other uh, services. And this is a table showing a matrix of national and local responsibilities with regard to solid waste management. You'll see these columns here on your left side. You have your national government responsibilities, such as developing the National Solid Waste Management Plan, legislation and policies that related to waste management, such as the Republic Act 9003, um, the menu or list of disposal technologies that local governments can use, some public awareness materials, and monitoring and evaluation tools. On the right side of this table, we'll see the different responsibilities of local governments based on each unit. So we have three columns here: the barangay, cities slash municipalities, and provincial. You'll see in the barangay column that as well as the city, they are in a way in charge of putting out ordinances or resolutions. These are mainly localized versions of national policies made by the government, particularly the Department of Environment. And we also see here activities pertaining to education, livelihood, enforcement of sanctions, as well as monitoring activities. Um, as you can see here, the barangay is also in charge of mainly waste management collection, but it doesn't mean that the city or the municipality is not involved in this. In some cases, the cities or municipalities are in charge of collecting residual waste. So these are, of course, the types of discards that are brought to landfills. In some cases, especially in highly urbanized areas, the city or the municipality is um, hires a private contractor to manage the whole solid waste management program on behalf of the barangays and the city. We'll do a quick detour and give you some examples from San Fernando, Philippines. This city has been recognized as one of the best models on zero waste practices. I'll show you some of the different ordinances or local laws that are put in place in this city, as well as how waste management program is being shared by or at least the functions being shared by the barangays and the city government. So in this slide, I'll just briefly show you the different ordinances that were put in place in the city in San Fernando. So first is on the first bullet point, you have number 2002-02. This is the Comprehensive Ecological Solid Waste Management Ordinance. This particular local law covers or is a localized version of the national law, the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. Next is 2005 002. This particular ordinance requires barangays in San Fernando. There are 35 barangays. So each one is required to set up or build a materials recovery facility. As of today, there are 38 MRFs that are being managed by these barangays. So that means there are at least one MRF in every barangay in San Fernando. Next, we have the 2006-006. This executive order rather, requires all residents in the city to observe waste sorting or waste segregation. Next, we have the 2007-002. I think this is very relevant to the city. It establishes the City Environmental and Natural Resources Office, which is like the local environmental office in Indonesia cities. So this particular office, it oversees the solid waste management program of San Fernando. In the local government code of the Philippines, this is not a required office. So sometimes this function of waste management is often shared in other, I guess, more important departments or offices, such as the agricultural office or general services, depending on the priority of the city leadership or sometimes the availability of resources. Next, we have the 2008-021. So this is the Environmental Code of San Fernando. This basically summarizes the environmental laws or ordinances that have been approved by the city dating back to 1946. So this, in a way, it's a quick, maybe what would be the best way to describe this? It could be like a glossary or a summary of the different environmental laws of the city. Next is the Executive Order 2011-001. This one deputizes barangay tanods or barangay police, as we call them, as the environmental officers. I'll discuss later about the enforcement of waste management programs, but in this case, basically, we need to multiply the efforts on how we can enforce the law, especially penalizing violators or offenders. So in this case, the city is tapping the barangay police to not only monitor or ensure peace and order in the communities, but also look at possible violators or making sure that waste sorting is happening in the barangays and other areas of the city. And then lastly, we have the City Ordinance 2014 008. So this is the law that regulates the use of plastic bags in San Fernando. So that means plastic bags are no longer allowed in the city except for some application in food products. So this slide shows the process flow of solid waste management in San Fernando. So As you can see, um, households and other waste generators are expected to sort or segregate their waste at source. In this case, they are sorted into biodegradable, recyclables, and residuals. These sorted waste, they are collected by the barangay and brought to the community MRF or materials recovery facility. The biodegradables, of course, end up in the composting area. The recyclables are sold to local junk shops or waste markets, while the residuals, they are temporarily stored in the MRF, but they are later collected by the city government. So the residual waste, they are uh, sent to the transfer station for another round of sorting before the remaining material is brought to a landfill. In this case, they try to recover some low value plastics that can still be used or sold to recyclers. But basically, this is how waste management works in the city. So going back to the Philippine Local Government Code, in three sections, sections 284, 285, and 286, it covers how local government revenues or government revenues mainly through tax collection are in a way divided. So 40% of government revenues go to local government units, to cities, municipalities, and barangays. And then this 40%, it's further divided into the different local government units, such as provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays. And the share that each local government unit is receiving is based on the population and land area of these units. In the Philippines, we have this concept called IRA or Internal Revenue Allotment. This is the main source of budgets of local governments, and the IRA is actually the tax collection that the national government gets, of course, from taxpayers, whether they're from individuals, from companies, etc. And the local governments primarily use this era or tax share to fund their public services, including waste management. Um, Yeah, in this slide, just want to use to show some of the funding options that are available to local governments. In this case, for San Fernando, they're not just relying on the internal revenue allotment. They also get funding from other sources. So, in some of the examples listed in their latest solid waste management plan, they get additional resources from permits that they get from junk shop operators, from fines and penalties from violators, also for those businesses that are applying for environmental management fees or get paying environmental management fees. They're also selling some of the organic fertilizer that they produce from processing organic waste, turning them into compost. They also get some sales from the green funds. Back then, when they started doing the plastic bag regulation, they had this levy or charge for plastic bags just to, in a way, become the adjustment period for the plastic bag ban. So I think after a year, they've already stopped the distribution of bags altogether. Other funding options or support, which I think in some cities, even in Indonesia, we also see this. We usually get some support or grants from funding agencies, from private companies or NGOs, and maybe from other government agencies as well. And because of this improvements in terms of the waste management services, San Fernando, they were able to bring down the cost of waste management to just 92 pesos per person per year. That's equivalent to about 20,000 rupiah. Uh, the figure in 2015, before, it was 164 pesos, or around 48,000 rupiah. So yeah, and I mean, if they try to in a way improve the waste collection as well as reduction measures, then this is expected to go down further. And that's the discussion about the Philippine Local Government Code, and some examples coming from the city of San Fernando in Pampanga. And now we move on to the next section, which is the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, particularly its highlights or salient points. So we have 10 here that were listed by Mother Earth Foundation, and I'll go through them each one briefly. First, we have local leaders. They have the potential to become zero waste champions. Under Section 10 of the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, local government units, which are represented by mayors, governors, and village heads, they are primarily responsible for the implementation and enforcement of the law within the respective jurisdictions. And part of that mandate given to these local leaders is to design or come up with a 10-year solid waste management plan. As I've discussed earlier, the national government, through the National Solid Waste Management Commission, is tasked to come up with a national solid waste management plan. But at the local level, the cities, the municipalities, and provinces, they're also required or mandated to come up with their own plans, at least 10-year for the 10-year period, to serve as their guide for outlining or implementing waste management programs in the respective jurisdictions. And if you have access to these slides, you can click some of the sample slides or the sample plans from two cities in the Philippines, one from San Fernando. I've shared some snippets of that plan in the previous slides, and another one for Quezon City, which is about the same size of Bandung City. And the national government provides a template or a manual on how to write this reports or this plan, so governments can just follow it. And ideally, they need to update it or take a look at it every 2 years, just to make sure it's updated, and they're able to be on track with regard to their targets. So the components of the 10-year solid waste management plan. So this is what you will see in maybe the table of contents or the outline of a typical document. So first, it starts with a profile of the city, the municipality, which contains general information about the area, the land area, population, list officials, and so on. Second, there's a explanation or chapter on the current solid waste management practices in the city. So it could also give a recap of the previous 10-year waste management plan of the city and what has been accomplished, and maybe some of the targets that maybe the city has missed from the previous plan. Third, you have your WACs, or that's your baseline data, In the Philippines, the national government encourages the cities or local governments to update their waste data every 10 years. So we know how tedious doing this doing this waste characterization survey. So at least they encourage them to do this every 10 years. And then up to them if they feel or they have additional resources if they need to update it more frequently. Next, there's a list of policies and legal framework on how waste management is anchored in the city. So this includes the localized version of the Republic Act 9003, the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. So this is the guiding national law that mandates local governments to sort their waste and transition to zero waste. And it will also contain some policies related to waste management, such as plastic use regulations. And I'm not sure if maybe there are also regulations on maybe on final disposal sites like landfills, or maybe procurement of new services, especially from the private sector, if they need to, for example, hire private contractors for disposal services. Next, you have, I think this would be the main body or chunk of this report or this document, the solid waste management system. This covers the collection schedule, routes, how many trucks are we getting, the inventory of facilities in the city, and so on. Next is the social, institutional, and environmental aspects of the plan. So this includes some of the risks involved in implementing the plan. This will also cover, for example, if there are some social impacts when building, for example, a new sanitary landfill, or if there are some concerns about building an MRF or a composting facility near houses. So in this chapter, they document some concerns from residents, for example, that are in a way not, in a way a bit hesitant in terms of doing or building these waste management facilities near their neighborhoods. Second to the last is you have your cost estimates or budgets. So they outline here how much are they spending every year. Since it's a 10-year plan, so they make a projection for 10 years. Usually you'll see the incremental increase in terms of budget based on the population growth of the city or the municipality. Last, you have the implementation plan. So this covers the schedule and or the timetable for implementing this plan. The implementation plan covers, for example, if the city plans to do for example, they plan to start or adopt zero waste. So maybe the first phase would include introducing it in several pilots. The second phase, or maybe just a hypothetical, it would be year 3 to year 6. You have maybe an expansion moving to several districts, and then towards the latter years, you have your citywide implementation. So for this particular slide, local leaders are not alone in turning their cities into zero waste models. They also rely on support coming from various stakeholders, and these stakeholders can become part of the local solid waste management boards because in the law it requires this committee or this board to be multi-sectoral. So that means it should be represented by different sector leaders in a city or community. These waste management board, they are tasked to develop a waste management plan, so the 10-year waste management plan, including oversight of the implementation, uh, reviewing the plans every 2 to 3 years, organizing regular meetings, and making sure that they're coordinating the implementation with barangays, especially talking to village heads. Third is specific to service contracting. So that means if ever the city or the municipality or local government decides to outsource the waste collection to a private contractor, so the Solid Waste Management Board is um, responsible for reviewing or making sure that the city is getting a fair share of the deal in terms of the contract. There are a number of cities that are in a way doing this, hiring private contractors or businesses to handle waste collection, especially in highly urbanized areas. But at least in practice, what we're seeing in some of the zero waste models here in the Philippines, like in San Fernando, they usually manage their own waste management programs. Number two, waste diversion targets. So, according to the law, um, the each local government should reach or achieve 25 diversion rate 5 years after the law's passing. So that means 2005, and then in the previous national waste management plan, it reported that it was at least in the Philippines was able to reach 50% average diversion rate by 2015. At least almost 50%. In Metro Manila, for example, it's 48, and then in other places, it's 46%. The target for 2022, according to the medium-term Philippine Development Plan for 2017 to 2022, the target is 80%, so it's quite ambitious. It will be a quite a tall order challenge for um, not just for the national government, but at least for the cities and municipalities to reach this. And we, at least of now, we have only a few cities that have in a way achieved or reached this target. So you have San Fernando, you have some barangays um, in Metro Manila that are already reaching the target, but looking at the country as a whole, it might be a difficult task ahead of them, considering that this is only uh, it's ready next year. Number three, the law, of course, mandates sorting of waste. So, two sections, Section 1 and Section 22, both recommend the sorting of waste at source. So, even for households, for institutional, for industrial, commercial, or and other waste generators. And the um, categories that are being recommended are four. So you have your compostables or biodegradable, non-recyclable, which is also called residual, recyclable waste, and special waste. So special waste refer to um, items such as diapers, napkins, and such. So just to show you the example of the fines and penalties in the city of San Fernando, when people or businesses or other waste generators violate certain provisions of the local city ordinances. And you'll see here if a particular person or waste generator fails to sort their waste or decides to burn the waste or um, litter anywhere or give away plastic-free bags, there you'll see in the third column there are recommended fines for these particular violations. So the fines are in pesos, so it ranges from 200 pesos to 5,000 pesos, depending on the severity of the violation. Aside from the fines, people can also get imprisoned, probably for the maybe for the third offense. When they reach the third offense, there's a possibility that they can be imprisoned or render community service for 1 to 15 days. Connection to number three, of course, if you're sorting your waste, then you should not mix them again. And I think this is a frustrating problem for those people that have already started sorting, and then they see the sorted waste getting mixed when it's collected by someone from the government. So when a collector passes through their house, takes their sorted waste, and then puts them in one bin. So that's frustrating. And in this particular law, mixing of waste, it's not allowed. So um, and each local government, they put out posters or education materials just to remind people about the collection schedule, the classification or the categories of waste, and some of the hotlines if they need some support in terms of waste sorting, or if they need to report someone who's violating the laws. Number five, the Republic Act 9003, it also mandates the closure of all dump sites, existing dump sites in the Philippines. And according to the law, the only disposal method that's allowed is a sanitary landfill. So sanitary landfill should only accommodate residual waste. That means the types of materials that can no longer be recycled or composted. Um, so in the Philippines, it's been a challenge to close these illegal dump sites. In back in 2010, there were more than 1,000. To date, at least as of March 2021, there are around 160, at least 160 dump sites left. So the government is still working on making sure that they're closed, hopefully by year end. Um, and part of this provision is to actually rehabilitate these dump sites. In this case, San Fernando, in this picture, there used to be a dump site in the city, and because they need to, in a way, follow and try to transform into a zero waste model, so they need to close it and rehabilitate it. The city is now sending its waste, at least the residual waste, to a sanitary landfill from another located in another province. Aside from dump sites, the law also prohibits the burning of waste. So incineration is not allowed or prohibited. Um, and there's also an emphasis on proper segregation, collection, transport, and storage and treatment and disposal of solid waste using the best environmental practices. And aside from the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, there's also the Philippine Clean Air Act of 1999, which prohibits burning of waste or incineration. Next, number seven, it's a reiteration of numbers three and four. So focuses on proper collection, on proper waste collection, making sure that there are no dumping of waste in curbsides or outside the houses. So that means if you go and maybe do a study tour or have a look in cities that are practicing proper waste management in the Philippines, um, households and other waste generators are not allowed to bring out their waste and just hang it somewhere or put it in a curbside or in a post. So they need to wait for the collector to approach their house or designate a collection point, um, maybe an MRF, in their particular community or city. Um, as you see in this poster, they need to follow a certain schedule. So outside the schedule, people can bring out their waste. And lastly, they only people are um, encouraged or required to hand over sorted waste to authorized collectors. They can't ask someone to sort their waste for them for a fee, because there's a possibility that that person can put your sorted waste or that collected waste in other places like waterways or curbsides. Number eight, proper treatment of hazardous waste. So, hazardous waste should not be mixed with residue or residual waste. In cities or municipalities, they are required to have special collection schedules. So, in some cities, you can actually call your local government to schedule the collection of hazardous waste. And usually, since these are not a lot in compared to the other fractions of municipal waste, so uh, governments or barangays or cities try to store them temporarily until they're in a way more cost effective to collect in bulk. Um, for medical waste, for example, uh, the advice is or the recommendation is to use non-burn technologies such as autoclaving or sterilization. So these technologies, in a way, try to sterilize or clean the virus or the contaminants in a discarded medical waste, so that they can become safe for disposal in landfills. So again, in this particular provision, burning is still not allowed, but they can uh, look for services that provide sterilization treatment. So number nine, every barangay or cluster of barangays should have an MRF or materials recovery facility. That's stated in Section 32 of Republic Act 9003. MRFs are designed to receive, process, and store organic waste and recyclables. In this picture, you see some receptacles for recyclables so that they can be sold later to waste markets and junk shops. Ideally, MRFs should also have a space for composting, so barangays can already process their own organic waste without relying on the city government. The city or municipality, on the other hand, they need to collect the residual waste so they can be brought to a disposal site or landfill. And then lastly, the last point of at least for this RA 9003 is the active participation of citizens. As I've mentioned earlier, citizens are part of or represented in solid waste management boards. They are in charge or responsible in designing waste management plans, reviewing the implementation, making sure that it's happening in barangays and so on. Um, Next, the public or citizens can actually file cases against anyone that's actually violating RA 9003. And we have some examples in the following slides. So in cities or municipalities, they can penalize citizens that fail to sort their waste or do open burning. But local governments can also face administrative charges, or they can, if they fail to implement or properly enforce the Republic Act 90003. And in over the years, we have seen several cases where local officials, mostly mayors, that are um, facing suspension charges, so they're getting suspended for 3 to 6 months for um, non-compliance or for not implementing the law. Aside from non-enforcement, the national government has also um, taken some position in terms of closing down landfills or dump sites that are operating illegally or are not operating properly. The Another government agency called the Department of Interior and Local Government. It's in charge of the governance of local governments in the Philippines. So they also issue notices to local chief executives to ask at least why they're not submitting or preparing, updating waste management plans. For this third section, I'll give a rundown of the figures taken from the Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022. Um, this is the performance of the national government with regard to implementing the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. And according to the SATS report, um, even though we have a nice law, the enforcement is a bit a challenge. In this case, only more than a third of local governments are complying with the law, and around the same number, only at least for the barangays, have MRFs. So um, and then in terms of disposal sites, it has been going down since 2010. So 2010, we had more than 1,000, and this March, it's now down to 169 dump sites. But it's still a long way to go. I mean, the target back then was to phase out or close disposal sites by 2006. So we're already more than 10 years delayed in terms of this metric. Fourth is the diversion target. So the target for, according to the Philippine Development Plan, it's 80%. So it's quite ambitious, but at least it's um, maybe challenging a lot of local governments to strive better. Unfortunately, at least looking at the figures what we have right now, only a handful of local governments are in a way on track of reaching 80%. So you have the likes of San Fernando, um, at least that already achieved this target, but the local governments, at least in the Philippines, definitely need a lot of support from the national government to make sure that they can meet this diversion target by 2020. So here are some recommendations, also using the Philippine Development Plan, the latest one. Uh, First is to promote sharing of waste management facilities. Um, Land has been very expensive in a lot of places, especially in urban areas. So local governments are in a way struggling to look for available land to build waste management facilities. And part of the recommendation is to at least make it more convenient for cities and municipalities to maybe they can share it with adjacent cities or local governments so they can save on cost. Second is to require the creation of a waste management office or environment office for each LGU. As I mentioned earlier, it's an optional provision in the Philippine Local Government Code. So if we have this environment office for each local government, then um, we would expect some heightened priority in terms of waste management and other environmental programs. Number three is to utilize or develop ecology centers for education and training. there are only a handful of regions or provinces in the Philippines that have these. So these ecology centers can be a hub for local governments and CSOs to learn on how to implement the law, as well as study the types of problematic materials that can be addressed through product redesign or reuse. Number four is to look at possibility of incentives for local recyclers. So in a way that can help increase recovery of materials, especially those located in rural areas. Next is the promotion of segregation at source. So I think in the salient points we've mentioned this more than once. So I think households and waste generators need a lot of some reminders for this, not just in um, getting posters in government offices, but at least seeing someone to go door to door or organize town hall meetings to um, at least remind people about this responsibility. And then lastly is to operationalize a solid waste management fund. So in the law, the government is required to set up a waste management fund to help local governments procure or acquire infrastructure or develop systems to improve their waste management services and eventually incorporate zero waste practices. But unfortunately, this solid waste management fund, it has not been in a way prioritized or budgeted. So for the longest time, for 20 years, it has received zero funding. So I think it's about time if, for example, if there's an opportunity for Indonesia to adopt this, then this is something that local governments would appreciate if the national government can provide this service and at least invest in more resources for cities and municipalities. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat box or yeah, just feel free to raise your hand and ask them. Thank you.